Welcome to the Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. My name is Dr. Adriana Popescu. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and leader in the field of mental health, energy psychology, addiction, trauma, and empowerment. In this podcast, we will be exploring mental health from a variety of perspectives, from the spiritual to the shamanic and beyond. What if mental illness isn't everything we think it is? What if everything we see as a pathology is actually a possibility? What else is possible with mental health? Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. I'm your host, Dr. Adriana Popescu, and I'm so excited to have with us today Dr. William F. Bengston. He is a professor of statistics and research methods at St. Joseph's College in New York, and he's the president of the Society for Scientific Exploration, an international group of scientists who study anomalies. Dr. Bengston has been doing research into anomalous healing for over 35 years and has numerous academic publications. His memoir, The Energy Cure, is published by Sounds True Publishers. He's also lectured widely in the US, Canada, and Europe. Dr. Bengston's research has produced the first successful full cures of transplanted mammary cancer and methylcholinesterase-induced sarcomas in mice. That's a tongue twister, by energy healing techniques that he helped to develop. He's also investigated assorted correlates into healing, such as EEG and fMRI entrainment, and geomagnetic micropulsation anomalies in healing space. His current work involves the attempt to reverse engineer healing and reproduce healing without the healer. Wow. Welcome, Dr. Bengston.
Thanks for having me.
So happy to have you here. I was first introduced to your work at an energy psychology conference where you spoke about this phenomenal research that you had done with mice and healing what is supposedly incurable forms of cancer. But before we get into that, I always like to ask my guests, how did you come to do this work? What is your story?
My story is probably similar to most, meaning it wasn't planned, and life happens, and it happens in unexpected ways. And one of my unexpected ways was a very, very long time ago. I think it was 115 years, a very, very long time ago. I was introduced to someone who claimed to be a psychic, and I am a skeptic. I was back 115 years ago. I'm still a skeptic, but I investigate stuff and see, what's what and what's real and what's not real. And I started to study this guy and try to make his alleged psychic stuff go away. I couldn't, no matter how elaborate I made the studies. And then he spontaneously morphed into a healer and was alleging to fix this and that. And I was somebody who had a persistent bad back, chronic bad back for many years, was in essentially pain of some level all the time. And this guy came along, put his hands on my back, and it's the last pain I've ever had. And so I was left with at least two possibilities, and here's where the fork in the road comes and life happens. I could either walk away and pretend it didn't happen, somehow conceptually get rid of it and be safer, or I could try to figure out what happened. How did this happen to me? And for better, for worse, I took the second road, and I've been looking at this stuff for quite a bit of time now, just trying to figure out what is behind this, and is it amenable to scientific study and things along those lines. So I've spent my time trying to take an unconventional area and put it into conventional research. And it turns out it is amenable to conventional research. But I didn't plan this, and like most people, if you look back over time, you say, how did this happen?
And here you are.
This happened to me.
Yeah.
What can I do? Yeah.
Yeah, you've really done some phenomenal work. And I think one of the things I wanted to highlight in that is that, many people think, okay, well, sure, some people are just really gifted. They have this gift for healing. Maybe they were blessed with it. Who knows where it came from? But one of the things I learned from reading your book and really understanding your work is that healing can be taught. This is not something that's exclusive to just a handful of special people. You, in fact, yourself have been able to create a method by which people can learn how to do hands-on healing.
Yeah, I think again the skeptic in me will question whether there's airtight conclusions that healing can be taught, and at this point I would say no, but it's extremely likely that healing can be taught. What my model that I've used in my research is I always take. I'm not comfortable hanging around believers. They scare me. Because believers already think they know the truth, and it makes no difference what you're believing in. So I believe it's all true. I believe it's all false. Either way, a believer isn't really open to investigation or to challenge their own beliefs. Most believers spend a good chunk of their time defending their own beliefs. I'm a skeptic, which means I don't pretend to understand how the stuff works, but I'm willing to look at it and I'm willing to systematically investigate it. And what I've done in as a model is I take already well-known biological phenomena like mice with cancer, and I introduce a single variable, which is healing, and then I see what happens. And the way I do it is that I take inexperienced people, people who have, they can't spell healing. They've never thought about healing. They don't know what I'm talking about. They think I'm doing a study in gullibility, things like that. Like what else can he make us believe? Something along those lines. And so I take people like that and I train them in a technique I help to develop, and then we see what happens in the lab. And so far, the overwhelming anecdote is that healing can be taught. Doesn't mean every method that's alleged out there, it doesn't mean anything like that, but certainly, at the very least, we can get people to heal. And, crazy geeks like me may argue about what the mechanism is by which they did it. Did they learn it? Did they copy this? Did they take information from that? That's the part that I'm not sure of. But certainly inexperienced people can produce healing. I don't know whether believers can heal because I've never tested them. Because again, they scare me.
But I love that. You're always in the question, right? And then that's how new information comes to us. If we've already decided what's true, then there's no opening for any new information to come. So I
No
love that.
point.
I mean,
No
that's the
point at
hallmark
all.
of a true scientist, right? Is to always be curious and to always be in that question.
I think it should be. I don't know that it is that widespread. So there are, in the academy, there are people who hang on to their textbooks as if they're divinely inspired, and they believe their own texts and they believe their own press and all those kinds of things. And those people scare me too, because they're defending their textbooks. And so I think that's largely a human condition.
Yeah. Well, you actually talk about it in the book. You talk about this Boggle Effect that people just can't, and it happens in this field too, where the results are too good to be true. This couldn't possibly be happening.
Yeah, yeah. Everybody, I think, hits a boggle threshold where they just say, no, that's too much. And it varies for people, and probably over time, if you look into this stuff, it will boggle you, and if you keep going, you just get tiers and layers of boggling. Because the simple reality is, although I've studied healing for many, many years, and I've done many, many experiments in many, many labs, I don't really understand how it works even if I have mechanisms of action that appear in the studies. So I've done a number of genomic studies looking at what happens to cell cultures and what happens to mice and what happens. Then we can look at this gene is upregulated and that gene is downregulated and all that. And the effects are real. There's no question. But these up and down regulations that you find when you do research, it doesn't really explain how it happens. So I sit there, and I scratch my head, and that's why it's called anomalous. When I talk about healing, it's anomalous healing because it doesn't make sense. If you read the textbook and then you look at the data, they don't match. So anomalous doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. It just means we don't have a way, a textbook, a theory that will help us to say, yeah, this is really what's going on, and now we understand the phenomenon. We really don't understand the phenomenon. And I would take it farther. I don't know anybody who understands the phenomenon. There are believers who believe they have, but if you really go after them skeptically, all the beliefs fall apart pretty quickly. And we seek the comfort of the illusion of our beliefs, but this area is ripe for theoretical development because it's really confusing.
So let's talk a little bit about the data. Tell us a little bit about those initial studies, the really mind-boggling studies that you did with mice and cancer.
Yeah, I started out when I was playing with this guy and who annoyingly fixed my back, and screwed up my life. I'm pain free, but what happened? um, I started dragging him around and putting his hands here and putting his hands here and see what would happen and what would be affected and what wouldn't. And it turns out, at least observationally, out in the real world, that some things are more easy to treat than others. Some things respond quicker. Some things don't respond so well at all. There's a real fundamental pattern going on here that I'm still trying to parse out. So healing, there's a tendency for people to put healing into, I don't know, magic. I've heard it. I mean, they think all miracles occur, and it's a natural phenomenon. I just don't understand it. It's a natural phenomenon. It's not a cure for everything. It doesn't fix everything. It doesn't, at least in my experience. So it's got properties that I'm trying to untangle. So in the very beginning, way back, I drag this guy around and say, put your hands here, put your hands there, and let's see what responds. And for example, one of the things that we found is he was not good at benign growths, but he was very good at malignant growths. And so malignant growths respond. Benign growths don't seem to respond. I mean, that's a clue from nature. And farther, the more aggressive the malignancy, the easier and faster it was to fix. So even if we just break the world down into benign and malignant, it's better, at least from this tradition, to do malignancies than a benign growth. But even within malignancies, some things, particularly seriously aggressive stuff, respond immediately and dramatically, whereas the less aggressive kinds of cancers, they kind of limp along. They limped in, they limp out. Aggressive ones rush in, rush out. So among the first observations, just physically, was cancer might be a good target. So we're talking about here possibilities. And now since way past cancer, but the cancer seemed right away to be a pretty good target. And after watching, I don't know, 100 or so people get fixed, I said, this is interesting, but it doesn't teach us much. The patient, the client, the whatever it is, comes in, they got whatever they have, you do the healing, and I'm oversimplifying the process. You do the healing, and the malignancy starts to reverse. Interesting, but we got a cured person, we got a cured person, we got a cured person, we got a cured person. This isn't going to come across right, but then what? So you're curing people. Well, who cares? It's interesting psychologically to find out the experiences of people who have been cured. It's interesting to see how they try to work around their own Boggle Effect. Like, oh my stars, this might be real. That, this, you weren't kidding, kind of a thing. I mean, all that's interesting, but it doesn't get to, it's not really airtight from a skeptic's point of view. So if I watch a case study of a person come in and you do, whatever it is you do, and then the person goes out, and again, I'm simplifying the process, and now they're better, they're cured, whatever term you want to use for it. That happens before this healing. Out there in the world, there are spontaneous remissions. Out there in the world, there are people who get better unexplained, by any mechanism, and it's open to all sorts of Boggle type interpretation, but people have been cured before. And so if I'm a believer, not a skeptic, because a skeptic would look carefully at the data, but if I'm a believer who believes this is nonsense, I go, oh, it's spontaneous remission, or it's the same way that people who don't know too much will say things like, oh, it's just placebo, as if they understand what a placebo is, and if they understood the patterns which occur in placebo research. So it's a way to keep yourself safe. It's just placebo. It's a spontaneous remission. So we'd get a case, for example, of someone who had metastatic cancer in the whole body, and in a reasonably short period of time after, there's no cancer. And you go to the doctor and you go, what do you think? And they just start flopping on the floor and they go, I've heard about this. I've never seen it. Do you want to investigate it? And the answer is usually no. There's not really an upside to doing this from a clinical practice point of view. And for a single case, I would agree. Spontaneous remissions happen, and weird stuff happens out there, and everybody doesn't follow the same path to the same whatever their destination might be. And so I wanted something stronger. So looking around, again oversimplifying this, but animal research in an experimental lab is tighter in control. Someone has cancer, you don't know when they got it, you don't know how they got it, you don't know what everything that's got into them, you don't know their genetics, you don't know what they're eating, you don't know whether they've, and you just keep going on and on. In the case of taking this into the lab, I guess I'm a closet control freak, but if you take this into the lab, you know everything that's going on. So I look around because I think in real simple terms, is there a mouse model? Is there an animal model that everybody knows everything about? And so what we came down to is a particular form of cancer, as a breast cancer, in a particular strain of mouse that has 2,000 publications about it. I mean, everybody, if you're in oncology, you know this model. And in this model, all mice, no exceptions, die within a month. So you inject them with a certain number of cancer cells, you know what step 1, step 2, step 3, death. And this is used in conventional research. So you say, well, I wonder if radiation will help them. I wonder if chemotherapy will help them. I wonder if vitamin C will help them, along those lines. And then you do research and you study and you publish and you do all that stuff. And so over 2,000 publications in these mice. And I said, perfect. Give me a mouse where there's no question. You're going to be dead in a month. And so we did our healing shtick on the mice. And the short version is they were all cured. And they weren't remitted, they were cured. Remission is a suppression or a cessation of symptoms. These mice lived their full lifespan, and it's much more than that. They're immune to cancer, same cancer, injected into them for the rest of their lives. And so that's different than, I got a story to tell you. This is done under seriously controlled conditions. And so essentially that same model has become a template with different kinds of cancers. The one you were trying to pronounce earlier, it's a different form. It's a different form of cancer, and so we've done it with the methylcholanthine stuff. We've done it with the mammary cancer. We've done it with immune compromised mice. We've done it with and so I think I have at this point, I don't know, don't trust the number, 18 mice experiments in 5 different medical schools and a couple extra independent labs in biology. Something real happens. It's they get cured, and they're immune for life, and we have this pretty established. So now the question is, what's associated with it, and how does it work? That becomes the thing. But healing of cancer isn't interesting. I mean, that doesn't sound right, but it's not interesting. It's established. It can be done. It is done. It can be done reliably. It's very different than looking at clinical stuff.
Right. Well, and so let's go there. So how have you applied what you've learned in the lab to actual work with people?
I haven't done too. I mean, I've done probably a few hundred cases, but I prefer. I'm more of a geek in the lab. I'm happier. People scare me. I call them uprights. I like little four-legged things that crawl along cutely. And then when these 6-foot uprights stand up and start arguing with me about everything, I don't want to play with you anymore. So I've done some people just to see what happens when you take it out into the real world. But more interesting to me is the people I've trained. So I've trained a number of people, and they're doing this all over the world. I think that would be fair. And they tell now they're the people who are clinically oriented, and there's a clinical mindset that is different than a lab mindset. And the clinical person, if I've got a client, my job is to fix the client. I'll do whatever I can do. So if my method helps, if the other method helps, it's you're not studying it per se. You're client focused, and you're doing whatever you can to help the client. The geek in the lab will try to control all the conditions and manipulate the variables and do that kind of stuff. So I've done a few hundred people certainly, but I prefer the few hundred mice to the few hundred people. And the people I've trained, they're all over the place, and they're fixing people left and right, and driving my skeptical head crazy because this can't be. So they're I mean, there's one center who has case reports on 500 people they fix. I mean, this isn't subtle. One location, 500 cases. Another location, 300 cases. Another So there's enormous amounts of clinical application that have been done in recent years, mostly not by me. I'm not a healer. I can barely spell healing, but I can heal. But not because of my self-identity as a healer. It's not that big a deal. It's just not.
Yeah. Well, so tell us a little bit about what you've discovered or what the people you've trained have discovered when it comes to mental health diagnoses, things like depression or
Yeah.
anxiety, trauma, whatever.
Yeah. We've done. There's certainly some mental health things that respond dramatically. We're very, very good with depression. So even I mean, we've just stupid one case anecdote. Somebody who essentially hadn't been out of bed in 20 years, and had lost everything, was basically just sitting and staring, and in I guess as severe as you possibly could get. That fixes pretty quick, and that can be traumatic for the patient. I mean, imagine if you had winked out for 20 years. It's not really analogous, but you're waking up like out of a coma because you're not really all there. So some healing too can be pretty traumatic. It can be traumatic personally because you're boggled, but it can be traumatic because a lot of people go through life uh, associating themselves as the disease, and you take away their identity, and it's not as simple as, oh boy, it's simple with mice. It's harder with uprights because they tend to identify with. So we're very good with depression. We're very good with bipolar. So we've taken hospitalized folks, and bipolar responds. There's a bunch never tried, like schizophrenic. Never tried one. Like to, because I'd like a data point, but I'm not really sure what works and what doesn't. There are psychiatrists out there using this stuff. There are psychologists out there using this stuff, and certainly using it on their patients and reporting to me things I don't believe. But I don't know really the full range of mental health kind of stuff. We're really good at, I don't know if you consider this mental health, like Alzheimer's. I mean, this is your turf, not mine, but I don't know whether that would be classified under mental health, but Alzheimer's responds very, very quickly. And that leads to a pattern that we've seen, at least in the clinical world. we seem to be better at taking away things you don't want than we are to stimulating things that you're missing. So if you have Alzheimer's, you have plaque on the brain. We can take away the plaque, and then your brain's left. If your brain's not good, that's past our pay grade. You know, if you've got age-related dementia as distinct from Alzheimer's, age-related dementia is a complex series of symptoms, and you've got an aging brain. We'll just call it an aging brain. We don't make you younger, but you don't have the plaque anymore. So you can have someone who is, clearly not there. Blank staring, and they're not really present, and they'll turn around really, really quickly because the plaque melts away. The age-related dementia, no. So if you're starting with a compromised brain and you add plaque on top of it, best we seem to be able to do is take away the plaque. We don't unage your brain, in anything that's meaningful. So taking away stuff, taking away a tumor, taking away a inflammation, we're really, really good at inflammation. And I've done lab studies on cell cultures with inflammation. It's pretty dramatic. We're not good, at least in my system, we're not so far not really good at giving things that are missing. So an example of that would be a type 1 diabetic. Type 1 diabetic is missing something that the body's not putting out. And we come along and we treat. It doesn't fix so far. So far. We've taken people who are seriously diabetic and they've lost all sorts of body parts and they're blind and all that. And we've given them about 50% of their sight back and about a 50% reduction in insulin, which, from a medical standpoint might be significant, but it's not curing them. That's what I mean. If you got cancer, it's cured. If you've got diabetes, you're a little, but I'm not impressed. They were impressed, but and pretty grateful. But I would say it doesn't seem to be going past that. We're not getting the insulin going in the body by itself. You still need your injections. You still need whatever you need, but you got your sight back. And like that. Parkinson's had tremendous difficulty with Parkinson's. Again, you're missing something. Your brain's not putting something out. Reduction in symptoms. Not particularly long term. It's not curing yet. We're working on different ways to treat this kind of stuff and making some inroads, but as a kind of a generic rule, better to take away something and than it is to stimulate something that's missing. Now, this may not be the case with all healing techniques. I don't know other healing techniques. Again, I'm not a healer. I'm not a this master or that master. I've never studied healing. I can barely spell healing. I just take the thing that I do and I take it into the lab and I dissect it, into oblivion. I'm certainly not suggesting that what happens in my healing is the same as what happens in other. So healing, it's not healing versus no healing. Healing, there's all sorts of healing schools and certifications, and I'm not involved with that stuff. A good clinician is because they should know what's out there, and what do you do to help the client. So if you were, well, I'll give you an example. Our technique is not particularly good at helping someone die. There are healing that I'm told that there are healing techniques and schools and such which calm the person down, kind of like healing hospice kind of thing. There's a reasonable chance that a lot of us are going to die eventually. So as you the transition to death can be traumatic. This isn't good at that. It doesn't calm you down in the same way, at least anecdotally, I've been told others do. So a good clinician facing a clearly about to die person wouldn't use mine. They'd use something else that has, a better track record. On the other hand, if you're using my stuff, it is good for stuff that I have not seen in comparative anything. So again, a very different mindset if you're a clinician versus an experimentalist. I don't do comparative healing research. I don't know any other healing techniques. I mean, I know of a couple, but I don't do them. I don't know them. I've never studied them. This is extraordinarily ripe for exploitation by somebody who wants to look at this thing. And I don't mean just clinically, but I mean under really tightly controlled conditions. I think it would be an incredible service if someone could do comparative. And this works on this, that works on that. Not to do a rank order. This is better than that. I give you a stupid example. It's real, but it's stupid. We're really good on aggressive malignancies. We can't do warts. Now that sounds stupid, and you go, who cares? But from a researcher's point of view, this responds, that doesn't. So if another healing technique can do warts, I don't put one more, you talk about cancer, the big C, like that. Well, I think the warts are the big W. It's I start flopping on the floor and run out of the room because warts scare me. I don't seem to affect them. And the interesting thing is the people who learn the technique also lose the ability to do warts. Now that's a clue, that something real is going on and something is going on here that isn't going on in others. And probably vice versa. Let's stop the contest of who's better. Let's really just take a look at the stuff and see if we can unravel it. But it would appear to me that my stuff, which I know a lot about, does things differently than other people's stuff that I don't know a lot about, at least by anecdote. They can do stuff, presumably, like the big W, that we can't do. And so what is it about this that a wart becomes an obstacle? That's a clue. I haven't been able to figure it out yet, but it's a clue. What is it that makes Parkinson's so resistant, yet bipolar, and you're talking brain stuff in both, that bipolar responds? I don't know the answer, but it's certainly not healing versus no healing.
Right. Well, coming from the clinician side of things, myself being a clinical psychologist, I just see it as different tools. For
Yeah,
every job, for every
yeah,
person, for even from session to session,
yeah,
this particular tool is going to be more effective in that
yeah,
given moment for that thing than this tool might be, right? So
yeah,
it is hard sometimes to make those generalizations
yeah,
across board. As a clinician, my job is, like you said, to be educated in all these different
yep,
tools and try different ones for different things until the client reports a change, right?
exactly. Yep. And again, from an experimentalist point of view, and then you're trying this, you're trying that, you're trying that, you're trying that, you're trying that, and I'm going, well, how do you unravel that? And that's what drives me crazy, and that's why I'm in the lab, and that's why you do what you do, and why I do what I do. I would not be a good clinician. I'm good clinically with the stuff that I already know works in my thing, but I'm not. I don't have a clinical head. I can't unravel the complexities of an upright. At trying this, that, and the other. What was it? This technique? Was it that technique? Did it take a while for it to kick in? Was it just time? Was it, and it'll drive me up the wall and I'll just run out of the room screaming. So I need to be safe in my little lab playing with rodents.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, from my perspective, what I have sort of gleaned from studying various modalities and working with clients for, 20 plus years now is that in some way, all of these energy healing techniques seem to be utilizing or activating some inherent ability of the body of the person in the body to heal itself,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I would completely agree.
Yeah.
I don't think I think of the person doing the healing, whether it's to mice or people or to whatever it is. I think of them as more of a channel of information. and where the information comes from and how they do it and all that stuff. I don't think anybody has really the foggiest idea, nor do I think that someone who is the healer should pat themselves on the back like they did anything. I think they happen to just be there. And what healing is the passing of information. But that leads to the next interesting question. If that's the case, why does healing technique A produce different information than healing technique B? That becomes my problem. Your problem becomes when you're dealing with a client, is to figure out which technique to use on whom. And that's the art of clinical application, and I'm not really good at it.
Well, there's another piece to this I want to explore as well with you, which is this idea of the healing effects extending beyond just the intended client or rodent or whatever, right? Like I know as a healer, when I'm doing work on someone, I too am receiving some sort of benefit.
Yeah,
After doing the healing work, I feel better. Maybe a similar thing within me also gets
yeah.
stimulated and activated, and you have this whole resonant bonding phenomenon. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I completely agree that the healer is getting a treatment as much as the healee. Maybe the healee has more need, at any given moment, but frankly, since I don't think healing has much to do with the conscious mind, I think anybody doing a healing should thank the person they healed, because they just got a benefit. This isn't a one-way street. Everybody's winning, which I think is a reasonably good system to have. But I would agree that the problem for healing is the problem for the healee as much as the healer. And by that I mean that the healee has a need. So let's say, let's put you need vitamin D. Well, the healer is offering a multivitamin. And if you take a multivitamin, you take what you need out of the array of things and you excrete the rest. So most of a multivitamin goes down the toilet eventually. And you take what you need, and what you need Monday is different than what you need Tuesday. And so today I need some calcium, and tomorrow I need some vitamin D, and I'm a little short on vitamin A, and that's, you don't walk around obsessing about that. That'd be called neurosis. Your body just does all that stuff. And I think what the healer is offering is essentially a vitamin pill, a spectrum of possibilities, a spectrum of information that the healee's body then takes. I don't think this has much to do with the conscious mind. And it's more than I think. I've got some reasonably good data on this, that healing happens, and healing happens as an autonomic response to need. So if there's no need, I could be sitting here, practicing my healing technique all day and all night. But if it's not being stimulated by a recipient, that's the real key to this thing. It's the recipient's need that they're going to take what they want. I'm just feeding pills. Or I'm feeding white light and you need a particular color. Well, what's blue? It's a subtraction from white light. If you're offering healing, you're offering a spectrum of possibilities that could be envisioned as light, it could be envisioned as nutrients, it could be envisioned in a whole variety of different ways.
Yeah.
The resonant bonding phenomenon that you bring up is seriously interesting, and does have clinical as well as experimental implications. And the real short version is, I think that the textbook assumption that's found in all research texts, as well as I think would be contained within common sense, is that physically separate people, or physically separate units, or physically separate pills, or physically separate mice are independent of each other. So you're where you are, I'm where I am. Okay, you do your thing, I do my thing, and occasionally we get on a Zoom call and we talk and we do those kinds of things. But otherwise, you and I are not, we're physically separate, so therefore we're independent. I don't think that's real. I think that the geeky term for this would be called locality, and locality means in this locale this is happening, and in that locale something else is happening, and the twains don't meet. Non-locality is a heretical idea that suggests that physically separate individuals or groups might be somehow bonded. And maybe the separation, which we're taught to see, isn't the only thing that's going on. And so you can see that, certainly you can see this in experience. On Monday you love your dog, and on Tuesday you hate your dog. Well, what changed? It's the same dog. But Monday I love the little pooch, and on Tuesday I hate the little pooch. Well, what's happened is our connection. And so healing, I think, is connection. And another way to say connection could be, if you want to go soft on me, love. It's a connection. And so we've all experienced connection, we've all experienced disconnection. It's not entanglement, it's a fluid connection and disconnection. Healing is the art of connection and offering to that to whom you're connected stuff. Now, healees, in turn, can be connected to each other. And what I found in mice experiments is that mice can become bonded to each other even at physically separate distances. So that a treatment to one mouse is a treatment to another mouse. A treatment to one cage is a treatment to another cage. A treatment to any part of the subjects is a treatment to all the subjects. And I'm sure, at this point, as sure as I can be, that I have these connections, which are sometimes called placebos. And a placebo, I think, is actually a connection of connected physically spatial groups to something. It could be a drug, it could be a stimulus, it could be healing. And I think that the question we have, and the motherlode question in all this, is what makes connections and what unmakes connections. And in terms of applications, I think you also would have tremendous clinical possibilities if you, as a clinical psychologist, could bond somehow your patients together, obviously with their permission. If there were a bondable, group, I think you could get an extra bang for the buck by a group phenomenon and a group treatment. A treatment to any one will be a treatment to all, and there may be a collective effect, even though you're only observing, one-on-one treatment or something along those lines.
Mhm. Yeah, well, it happens already in group therapy,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we already have that effect. And I think of Lynn McTaggart's work with I was in a workshop where she had, all of us, one person was the identified, patient,
Yeah.
but all of us were like together, sending that person healing energy. And yet we all received healing as well. It was very palpable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think that stuff is real.
Hmm.
And it's by real, I mean, I think it's a real physical phenomenon. I've studied it using EEGs and functional MRIs and, geeky toys. But basically, what it shows is that we actually can physically connect. And I have, seriously controlled studies showing brains going into phase locking at a distance. So, in essence, they're locked. Now, that doesn't mean your conscious mind is aware. And I'm not a big fan of the conscious mind. I don't think it's as interesting as people think it is. I'm much more interested in the autonomic stuff that goes on. And I think healing is an autonomic response to need. And I think that if you and I go into brain phase lock, it doesn't mean you're walking down the street and you go, oh, there's Bengston. Sensitives might feel that. But in ordinary life, I think there's bonds all over the place. And I think they're real, and I think an incredibly interesting area is trying to figure out what makes bonds and what breaks bonds. And I see the bonding in mice. I see the bonding in cell cultures. I see the bonding in people. I see the bonding all over the place. So everybody has a different conceptual lens where they see the world. One of my most fruitful lens creations is this idea of resonant bonding. It starts to take a lot of the world that's confusing, and within it, if you start thinking in terms of resonant bonding and you give up the idea that separateness means independence, the world starts to take on a different flavor.
Yeah. Well, and I think it offers us a lot of hope too, right? I mean, with so much conflict and strife and everything going on in the world right now,
Yeah.
maybe as more of us start to activate these healing energies within ourselves, with clients, whatever it is, maybe it has that resonant effect on the world as a whole.
It might, again, right now past my pay grade, but it's a nice thought.
Yeah. So tell us what you're up to now and tell us a little bit about the trainings that you're offering. How can people find out more about the Bengston method?
Well, I have a website. I'm told I don't really look at it. Someone else does it, but bengstonresearch.com will have, I think, research papers. I think workshops. I think ways to do this, ways to do that. We're just running now 2 clinical studies out on healing that are just coming from Bengston Research people who have joined the forum and they're playing around. And you put out a call for volunteers, and people are all excited about this stuff. And they're having fun. That's a beautiful thing. So they're out there playing, they're out there having fun, they're taking part. They're helping me out in research and they're becoming part of it, and all those things. It's that's a good thing. So the trainings are listed. To be honest with you, I don't know when the next ones are. I don't pay that much attention. I just did one in Germany. I didn't go to Germany because Germany's doesn't exist anymore. We're not allowed to talk to people in Germany, and we'll get COVIDed and all that stuff. I've done a bunch of Zoom things, and there's probably some coming up in 2021. I just off the top, I don't know whether they'll be live or distance. And exactly, but I don't handle those kinds of scheduling things. So the best I can offer you for when the trainings are is to check out bengstonresearch.com and poke around and see what that's like. What I'm working on now is I'd like to make healing, whether healing happens isn't interesting anymore, and I'm into the kind of like the secondary questions of dose response questions, and what does this work on better than the other, and all of those things. Um, and let's say that healing can be taught. So let's start with that assumption. So let's say 100 people in your audience take a workshop from me. And let's assume, thought experiment, that everything works perfectly. It's not going to happen. But everything, and so these 100 people now can go out and do, the stuff that I'm teaching. And they all go out and teach 100 people. Well, that's beautiful. So you got 100 times 100, and then they go teach. There's still an inexhaustible supply of people in pain. And so to make this scalable, I think is interesting. And if we can make it scalable, we can also take out the craziness from it and stop making it, don't confuse healing with sacred, or it's not this, ethereal thing. It's healing. Give me a break. You're healing all the time. So if you study the immune system, you'll get a real dose of healing. You'll see miracles all over the place. If you study hands-on healing, you'll see miracles. But I don't know that one miracle is better than the other. But to take healing one-on-one as opposed to an inexhaustible supply of people around the world who need it, how do you get it to them? And so what I'm trying to do now is replicate the healing without the healer. And if I can do it in such a way to make it scalable, then it becomes globally available. So what I've looked into in some detail, and people can poke on the website and look at some publications, is storing it. I've stored healing at this point in organic and inorganic material. In organic material, for example, I've stored it in cotton, and cotton. If you bring cancer cells near the charged cotton, they genomically change, in a reliable way. It's again, it has nothing to do with belief. It has nothing to do with anything like that. So I can store it in cotton. I can store it in water. I can store it in a variety of materials, but that doesn't necessarily make it scalable. So if I have a bunch of cotton and I have to charge each piece, who cares? It's interesting from a scientific point of view, but it doesn't make it scalable. But if I could get cotton to charge other cotton and it becomes a self-replicating system, I have something scalable. If I can get water to charge water, I have a self-replicating system. If I have a recording and that recording can be uploaded into the web, then it can, it's those kinds of things. So I have some recent publications in a biology journal showing that a recording we've made, it's pretty over the top and elaborate, of people practicing my method inside of a Faraday cage while charging cotton The playback, again, it's over the top with 38 different kinds of fancy detectors going on. We collapse that to a recording that you can't hear, and we play it to cancer cells, and they know it, and they respond. And we get reliable 68 genomic change. We did this at Brown University. 68 reliable genomic changes in cancer cells when they hear nothing. If you put your hands around, you get 68 reliable changes. So it's doing. But now this is uploadable and downloadable. You said, I mean, that's upping the ante here. We have a couple of experiments out now on animals as well as some clinical trials on some water that will turn into a self-replicating system, and that seems to be doing it. And so if we can get water turning into water that heals, turning it to, and have it replicate, that becomes a scalable proposition. In the case of the recording, I mean, we're about to do some studies starting about next week in Tokyo. I've got some studies about to start in Houston. I've got some studies about to start in Providence. I've got some studies about to start in the Netherlands. And I can keep going. We've got this, but it's all involving the idea of a self-replicating system. Does it reproduce the healing phenomenon, and does it do it in a way that makes it scalable? And so far, fingers crossed, because it's seriously interesting, it appears to be. And
Wow.
so if we could get a downloadable cancer cure, that'd be kind of fun.
Yeah. And you've
An
expressed
Alzheimer's
that
downloadable cure would be fun.
yeah, you would like to have a global cure for cancer that's accessible to anyone. You've
Be
said
kind of
that.
fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
be kind of
Wow.
fun. We'll see where it goes, but that's my current thing because I've been doing this for 115 years. I'm only going to do research. I've decided another 80 years and I'm stopping, and so I'll have done my time. Then I'm going on retirement or semi-retirement, and because there'll probably be more projects that I have to do then, even then. But if we can turn this into a self-replicating, globally scalable phenomenon, then I don't care what believers say. Let only the skeptics get fixed. I'm okay.
Such fascinating work. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I hope that the listeners have had their minds and their beings opened up to this. There's so many infinite possibilities for energy healing. We're going to add your website and all the information in the show notes. Any final thoughts you want to leave us with, Dr. Bengston?
Yeah, don't believe anybody who believes what they believe. It's
Wise words.
it's an interesting area, but we're all groping in the dark with our eyes closed.
Thank you so much for all you've contributed. Thank you all for tuning in today. If you like this podcast, please be sure to share, like, and comment so we can get this information out in the world and more people can know about the infinite possibilities available with these alternative perspectives on healing and mental health. I'm your host, Dr. Adriana Popescu. See you next time. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. This has been Dr. Adriana Popescu. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share with others. To find out more about me, my guests, and more, please visit my website at adrianapopescu.org. See you next time.